Okay. So it looks like we're good to go. Everybody hear me? Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Siddhantotpalasara Nityarasikam Hangsang Vilasatmakam Audaryakya Sudhama Sevagadhanam Vishramba Bhakti Pradam Yatya Yukti Vichakshanam Twagavido Vaisishta Shaktya Sada Vandeham Tripurari Namakayatim Shri Bhakti Vedantinam Anandamaya Lila Ananda Lila Maya Vigrahaya Himabha Divyacha Visundaraya Tasmai Mahaprema Rasa Pradaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Glad to see everyone here. Let's see. So far, we've been discussing the Leela of Madhavendra Puri and his relationship with his deity, Gopal, who revealed himself and asked for service and whatnot. So on the first day, we went through a brief overview of the Leela. And then the last time we discussed the tattva of the Archa Vigraha. And now today we actually get to the qualities of the devotee. There's a really nice article written by Thakur Bhakti Vinod, published in his Sajjan Toshini magazine, wherein he writes about this topic. He called it the Swarup of the Vaishnava. And so I really like that. His approach there was very comprehensive and not a very long article, but a really nice approach. And what he brought out there was the Swarup Lakshan and the Tatastha Lakshan. And so I wanted to go into that a little bit because that's it's a framework that we find throughout our philosophy. And if we are familiar with those two concepts, then it's much easier to grasp the essence of a tattva or a thing. So the Swarup Lakshan, of course, is the intrinsic characteristics of an object or a concept. And the Tatastha Lakshan, excuse me, Tatastha Lakshan is the marginal characteristics or the characteristics that arise out of the Swarup Lakshan. So a couple of examples that I thought of before I get to the actual qualities. So for example, in Uttam Bhakti, we know that the Swarup Lakshan is Krishnanuchilanam. That is the intrinsic characteristic of the type of bhakti that Rupa Goswami is talking about in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is this favorable cultivation of love of God with a favorable attitude. And being devoid of any other endeavors and not aspiring for karma or gyan, those are marginal characteristics that define that type of bhakti or show that type of bhakti is going on. And they arise out of that first characteristic. Another example is the Swarup Lakshan of Rag Bhakti, we find this in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, is called Gada Trishna. It's a deep thirst to please the Lord. And out of that arises avishtata, complete absorption in Krishna consciousness. So it's very interesting. I remember the first time I read that, I was like, oh, interesting how that works. Because one would think that absorption would come first, but it doesn't. So there are 26 qualities of a devotee that we find in different places. But before I go into that, I just wanted to, there's a really nice verse that I wanted to read, or which most of you will probably be familiar with. It's from the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam. Yasyasti bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarvair excuse me, sarvair gunais tatra samasate sura hara bhaktasya kutu mahat guna mano ratena sati dhavato bahi. All the demigods and their exalted qualities, such as religion, knowledge, and renunciation, become manifest in the body of one who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. On the other hand, a person devoid of devotional service and engaged in material activities has no good qualities. Even if he is adept at the practice of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining his family and relatives, he must be driven by his own mental speculations and must engage in the service of the Lord's external energy. How can there be any good qualities in such a man? So the point that I'm making by quoting this verse is that all of these qualities are embodied in the devotee. And Madhavendra Puri, of course, being a high level devotee, and manifested all these qualities. But as we'll hear going forward, there's not enough, there wasn't enough description of what he did to really showcase all 26 qualities. And so but there are a number of them that really are prominent in the Leela that I wanted to bring out. But before that, I want to also go through. So what are these qualities? Well, actually, first, here's a thought that I had was, as I've gotten older and I've tried to gravitate more toward the essence of everything that we are involved in, when I'm studying a topic now or I'm reading something, I'm in the back of my mind, I'm asking myself, how is this going to benefit me in my practice? And if it's not, then I don't read it. I don't bother. And so, it could be super abstract or seemingly abstract material, like you find, for example, in the Paramatma Sandarbha, or really detailed, dense philosophical material that we find maybe in the Sandarbhas or something like that, that is not super basic. One may wonder, well, how is this going to help me? And the general idea is that it's part of the Sambandha Gyan, and so that forms the framework that we do what we do with, and so that benefits us. And, but in this case, I thought of two reasons why knowing the qualities of a devotee would be useful to us in our daily practice. And that would be, the first of which is how to identify a devotee. So if we see a person having these qualities, then we know that they are indeed a Vaishnava. And to the extent that they don't, they are either an aspiring Vaishnava or they're not. And then we can gauge our level of involvement with them accordingly. And so that's kind of like the external reason to know this. Very useful if we're for example, looking for a guru, or trying to understand where where along the path a person is, to some degree. Obviously, I mean, we can't really see a person's internal life, but it manifests to some degree externally in these qualities. And the other reason I thought of was, and arguably perhaps the more important of the two, is that we can see whether or not these qualities are manifesting within ourselves, and cultivate them consciously, and which is a bit of a backwards way to go about it, I guess you could think of. In other words, if you're sincerely engaged in bhakti, in the primary limbs of bhakti, excuse me, then these qualities will arise naturally without any extraneous effort. But it's good to know that there is sort of a excuse me, a standard of behavior set by these people who have these qualities. And so it's something to know, okay, if I'm moving, if you're starting to see these qualities arise in yourself, then you know you're moving in the right direction. So that's a very useful, very useful thing to know, some of these qualities. And so, so with the Swarup Lakshan and Tatastha Lakshan in mind, I'm going to start going into the actual qualities themselves. And I'm going to read through the list of them, just so we kind of have an idea of what they actually are. And then we're going to talk about the single one that is the Swarup Lakshan, from which all these others are derived. So the first one is, the devotee is very kind to everyone. He does not make anyone his enemy. He's truthful. He's equal to everyone. No one can find any fault in him, unless they're atheists. He is magnanimous. He is mild. He is always clean. He is without possessions. He works for everyone's benefit. He's very peaceful. He's always surrendered to Krishna. He has no material desires. He's very meek. He is steady. He controls his senses. He does not eat more than is required. He is not influenced by the Lord's illusory energy. He offers respect to everyone. He does not desire any respect for himself. He is very grave. He is merciful. He is friendly. He is poetic. He is expert. And he is silent. So you may read that list and think, well, okay, I've got a ways to go. I know I surely do. This is a tall order. But the Swarup Lakshan of the devotee, then, which one of these, out of all of these, the 26 here, there's only one that is at the heart of what a devotee is, and that is, he is surrendered exclusively to Krishna. So out of that one quality, all the rest of these manifest. So it's very interesting. It's very interesting how that works. So as we become more God conscious, we become more like God, and he, of course, possesses all these qualities. And so, as I mentioned, there's only excuse me. There's only a handful of these that, in the Leela of Madhavendra Puri, we're going to see that are really prominent. And those are, I mean, of course, he's very kind to everyone. But, he's truthful. He doesn't make any enemies and such. But so Madhavendra Puri, I mean, one of the ones that really stick out, he's without possessions, right? He works for everyone's benefit. That's a big one. We're going to talk quite a bit about that one. He has no material desires, clearly. He's steady and does not eat more than required. Those really, as we can see from the Leela, they really stand out. So I'm going to kind of go through the list again, but this time with I went through the list and I kind of made some notes, just some mental notes, very brief purports, and then the ones in Madhavendra Puri's case we'll speak about more extensively. So merciful. So a devotee is, of course, merciful, which means they're kind, they're compassionate, and they only desire the good for others. And in other words, they have no envy of others. They have nothing. They see everybody as just a jiva trying to eke out some existence, eke out a living in this very difficult world to live in. They know how harsh the world can be. I was talking with Guru Nishta the other day, and I kind of I said the world is a harsh mistress, and that is basically playing off of the title of a science fiction book that was written in the 60s by Robert Heinlein called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. So the world can be a very harsh mistress. And so the devotees recognize that, and they recognize that jivas are just struggling in the material world. And so they're merciful to them. They try to help them. They want to uplift everyone. And as we'll hear later on, that Madhavendra Puri or any devotee of a higher caliber, they are very busy in trying to help everyone. That is, in fact, at a certain point in our trajectory toward going back to Godhead, that becomes our sole occupation in life, besides our internal cultivation, trying to benefit others, trying to uplift others, and give them the solution to the problem of material life itself in the comprehensive form of spiritual knowledge. That becomes the sole occupation of the Vaishnava. So something to look forward to there. We will become merciful if we're not already. The next one is undefiant. So I'm reading these, the first list that I read was from Prabhupada's purport of that 5th canto verse. And now I'm reading a slightly different translation. So undefiant is submissive to spiritual authority. And so they're not, they're not, they're meek, and they give respect where it is due. The next one is the essence of truth. So they're truthful. They're honest people. Vaishnavas are honest people. They've got, if God is the source of all truth, then a godly quality is being truthful. The devotees are that. And so I think most devotees probably don't struggle too much with that quality or the lack thereof. The next one is equipoised. So the mind and senses, having those under control, then the jiva is undisturbed by external conditions. And so this is one of the qualities that Krishna describes as yoga. Or yoga is samatvam, equality. So that's quality that you'll find. And bhakti is a type of yoga, and so therefore, if one is indeed a bhakta, one is a yogi also. So the next one is faultless. The Vaishnav's heart is pure. So when Prabhupada says no one can find fault in him, and I mentioned that, well, the atheist can, that's that's not what we're talking about in terms of, I think it's really a faultless. Faultless is really talking about the purity of heart and of a sincerity of intention to aspire to be a servant of Krishna and a surrendered soul. And if one is already a surrendered soul, then and they have all these qualities, yeah, then they will be. It'd be kind of hard to, for the most part, I would think their behavior would be difficult to find fault with because they are kind and generous and whatnot. And they're as we've heard about Prabhupada, that he was liked by pretty much everybody. People would meet him, they didn't know what he was about, but they just somehow they just liked him because he had a very attractive personality. And so that's one of the qualities we find in sadhana bhakti, that the devotee at a certain point, as they become auspicious, shubhada, they become, as Guru Maharaj renders it in his Shikshastakam commentary, popular, pleasing and popular. Even though they don't desire any fame, attention from the ordinary people comes to them because they have these qualities. In fact, the intent, the more you don't want the fame, in a sense, paradoxically, the more it will come to you because specifically because you don't want it, then you run from that. And Madhavendra Puri exemplified that, as we'll hear later on. The next one is munificent or generous. So, and this is like a generosity of spirit, a generosity of heart. They give people the benefit of the doubt, and they're willing to see the good in others and overlook their faults. They're not, the Vaishnava is not, their preoccupation is not looking for the bad in others. They're like bees gravitating toward the honey rather than flies gravitating toward the, well, if you've been around cows, you can see what flies gravitate toward, the cow patties. So do we want to be, seeking out the unclean things or in others, or seeking out their good qualities and exemplifying those? And so they're generous. Their generosity of spirit is a large aspect of their personalities in every case that I've ever seen. And another thought that I had about this quality was that they're so full that they can happily give to others. So they're generous materially as well. And in other words, whatever they have, they will freely give in order to assist someone else, because, well, they're not attached to the things they have, and also they're again, that generous spirit. They're willing to help and give to others freely. And as you can see, that as we go through these qualities, you can see that there's a fair bit of overlap between them. Like, for the example, the next one is, you go from munificent to gentle, and how they kind of, or merciful and gentle, kind of play off each other. So to be gentle is to be without malice, and seeking to reduce the suffering of others whenever possible. So that quality works together with mercy. So if one is gentle and is only seeking to reduce others' suffering, hates to see other people suffering, then of course they're going to be merciful to them and try to help them. And the next quality is pure. They're devoid of material desires. So purity is a big topic in most religions, and it means different things to different people. And by purity, of course, we mean what I'm talking about here. I mean, it's one thing to be purity external, or externally, like in the first rendering, the devotee is always clean. Yeah, okay, sure. But I mean, you can find plenty of people who regularly bathe who are not devotees. So what that means, of course, that it's an internal type of purity. It's purity of character, of course, but it's also it's purity of heart. And what that means, purity of heart, is being devoid of material desire. Don't there's no endeavor for material things. And so the next one is without material possessions. So in Madhavendra Puri's case, he's a sannyasi, so he was literally without any possessions. I mean, other than we hear he had his mala that he chanted on and the clothes he was wearing. He didn't have anything. I mean, that's obviously an extreme level of renunciation, like we hear about the Goswamis, where they would, like for example, Sanatan Goswami arriving. Where did he arrive? Was it Nityananda's? No. He came to a house that I cannot remember the devotee's name, the place where Mahaprabhu was staying, and he had just escaped from prison, and he still had a giant beard. And
was it Chandrasekhar?
So he went, and Mahaprabhu told him, when they met, Mahaprabhu told him to change his clothes and dress like a Vaishnava and whatnot, and get a haircut. And so he did that. And then he had I guess it was like a chadar or quilt. It was called a quilt, the way it's rendered in the text, or Prabhupada renders it as. But so he had this apparently a very nice chadar. And even that was, Mahaprabhu kind of gave the side eye to that. And Sanatan took the hint, and then he went to the river, and he found a man there with just a torn quilt, and he asked him to trade for it. And the man was like, "Why are you making fun of me like this? Clearly you just want to make fun of my poverty." And Sanatan said, no, I'm serious. This is the real deal. I want that quilt, the one you've got, and you can have this one. And so he made this trade, and Mahaprabhu was very happy to see him when he adopted that. And Raghunath Das Goswami, similar kind of idea, just the extreme renunciation of these Goswamis. And now they took it to this extreme for a reason. They didn't particularly need to be that extreme. They could have been just as happy in material opulence, like Pundarik Vidyanidhi. Sure. But of course they were in a position to exemplify the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and establishing a sampradaya. And so they wanted to demonstrate that bhaktas are renounced as jnanis, and in some cases to the point where frightfully so. I mean, Madhavendra Puri he was taking rest under a tree when Krishna appeared to him with the pot of milk, as we heard in the beginning. So he's got his soul surrender, the Surablakshan, his soul surrender to Krishna gave him no material desires, and therefore material possessions to him, because he was a sannyasi, they had no use for him. But this does bring up the point of vairagya, based in Gyanmarg, and the yukta vairagya that we find in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we may find people who are externally renounced and yet extremely attached to the things they do have. So like poverty will do that to people, where you find in India, for example, people who are, or anywhere where the people are extremely poor, they don't have much, but what they do have, man, if you try to take it from them, they'd be very unhappy with you. So in general, this means in a bit larger sense, in the yukta vairagya sense, it means, again, so yukta comes from, or it's a similar word to yoga. And so then again, this brings up the principle of samatvam, this equality, the middle way. So one is, the Vaishnava is not attached to things, and neither do they reject things. They recognize things for what they are. They're made of Krishna's energy. And as such, they're his to be used in his service. And so there's that famous quote by Srila Prabhupada where he said, we don't, the Gyanis, they go like this. When you try to give them things, they say, no, 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 we don't want anything. He said, but we do this. We embrace everything, and we take it and use it for Krishna's service. And that's yukta vairagya. So that's an important quality to understand, and understand it properly. Because obviously we're living in the material world, and we have to engage with the sense objects whether we like it or not, otherwise we will die. And so, and that's I would imagine to be a bit of an inconvenience. And so how to interact with sense objects without being owned by them. There was a movie from the 90s called The Fight Club. It had Brad Pitt in it. It was one of my favorites back in the day. But there was a line out of that, a line in that movie that really stayed with me. And at one point, the protagonist is having a conversation, and he said, "The things you own you." And so we definitely want to avoid that. And so it's one thing to have things, and it's very nice to have material facilities, house to live in, and relatively comfortable bed and all that. It's great, but to not be attached to those things, that takes some time. That takes some work. And as far as the extreme renunciation of the Goswamis, that came out of their absorption in not only their establishing the sampradaya, but also their absorption in Krishna consciousness. They genuinely forgot that they had external forms. They were go into trance and live there for extended periods of time, and the famous example of Raghunath Das Goswami in his later days, when he was living at Radha Kund, meditating on the banks of Radha Kund, and so absorbed in his service to Sri Radha in his Manjari Swarup that the sun was burning him, or the tiger comes, and the Sanatana Goswami sees this and is like, and then a young girl comes and gives him shade, or I don't remember the details of it, but there's a couple of different examples where he's one from Radha, which Sanatana Goswami saw and was like, that is unacceptable. We can't do that. We serve her, right? So build a hut. But he was so oblivious to his external environment because he was so absorbed in Krishna and so absorbed in his internal life. So as I was told right from the get-go when I joined by Bhakti Bhavana Vishnu Maharaj, who was staying at the ashram in Eugene where I joined, he said, he was talking about the Goswamis, and he's like, so they exemplify renunciation for us, but we should not try to imitate them. We can't do that. that their renunciation is otherworldly, like Madhavendra Puri's. I mean, you've got to, in order to be able to live like that, to have nothing, literally nothing, and be happy, and to be willing to undergo the physical inconveniences that come along with having nothing. It's not so easy to do. You've got to really have something going on internally to be able to do that. Um, Otherwise, you're just going to create a disturbance for yourself and others, and probably uh, fall from the path, or at least hamper your development. In other words, if you overreach your adhikar, well, there's going to be a rebound effect. So the next quality. Checking time here. Always engaged in beneficial work for all. So there was some interesting thoughts that I had about this one. And it centers around giving Bhagavad Katha in all its forms. And now specifically with regard to Madhavendra Puri, it's centered more around the deity, which we can talk more about in a minute. But just in general, I thought I was just trying to think about what the form that this generally takes. Tavakatamritam tapta jivanam kavibhiriditam kalmashapaham shravana mangalam shrimaratatam bhuvi grinanti bhurida jana. So the gopis say that the highest, the most munificent welfare worker is the one who speaks about Krishna. Beautiful verse. So the devotee, their primary welfare work is not opening hospitals, it's not feeding people, although they may do those things. It is giving Bhagavad Katha in all its forms, whether it's verbal or written. Why? Why is that? It's because the Krishna Katha, Lila Katha, is the medicine for the hridrogam, the disease of the heart, the materialism. We're all material addicts, as Guru Nishta likes to think of it as, which is, it's good. We're all recovering addicts. And so the Katha Amritam, the Amrit, the deathless nectar of speaking about Sri Krishna and his devotees, that is the thing. That is the thing that is the most, that's the medicine with the most comprehensive effect, and can give the comprehensive solution to the problem of material suffering, and so much more. I mean, it can take us, can turn us into a person with all these qualities, and who is a soul exclusively surrendered to Sri Krishna, and that is extraordinary. So this speaks to the power of sound itself, and how it has the ability to be being so subtle. It has the ability to penetrate the mind, and anybody who's ever, I'm sure we all have the experience of hearing some advertisement and having that, or remembering a song, just hearing a fragment of it, and then having that looping through the head for the rest of the day. I'm sure we've all had that experience. And so sound is so subtle, and it's very difficult to escape it. If any of you have ever been to Vrindavan, you know that there's just a cacophony of competing sounds. All the different ashrams start beginning at dawn there, or sometimes even before dawn. They're playing bhajans, or playing this, or chanting shlokas, or whatever, and it's all going on at top volume, of course, because it's India and that's how they do everything. And it's very difficult. And I was there trying to do Giriraj Puja at that time, and I've got all this sound that I'm trying to tune out and focus on my puja. It's not so easy to do. So sound is very powerful, and then one could say that the power of speech is well, it's unique to humans, and one could say that it is perhaps our greatest power, because it gives ideas form. We take this abstract picture in the head and we use sound to manifest it into the world. So it's bringing feelings and ideas into the world from the heart and from the soul. It's a very fundamental human capability. I mean, the Vedic tradition gives a lot of what's the word, airtime, you could say. It gives quite a bit of attention to the power of vak, speech. And indeed, we see from the Bhagavad that Sri Brahmaji himself manifests the entire material creation through the power of sound, shabda. So, and Srila Sridhar Maharaj talked about the power of sound by giving an example of how in wartime, one of the first things, if you're trying to conquer another country, that one of the first things you do when you get there is take over the communications. So in any case, the sound and speech, there are immense implications for manifesting into the world, and with that power comes responsibility. And so this is what Krishna calls the austerity of speech in the Gita, and that relates to quality 26 of the list. The devotee is quiet, they're silent, they're careful with their speech. They don't speak a bunch of nonsense, because they know that it's going to have, if not the ability to manifest something physical, it's going to affect their own mind and the minds of those around them. And so being munificent, being always engaged in the benefit for others, beneficial work for others, they want to uplift others. And so they understand the power of speech. And so then what is the best speech? Tavakatamritam. So that is something to meditate on, which I think I've noticed as we get, I know it in myself, as I get more absorbed, and whenever I'm more absorbed in my practice and whatnot, I'm much more careful with my speech. And in times when I've been in a different space, so anything goes. And those of you who know me personally know that I don't always have the most pleasant speech, but trying to move in the direction of being more responsible with that. And a related verse to this quality of being always engaged in the beneficial work rather for all is, it's a Bhagavatam verse that I'm sure you'll be familiar with, most of you. As pouring water on the root of a tree energizes the trunk, the branches, twigs, and everything else, and as supplying food to the stomach enlivens the senses and limbs of the body, simply worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service automatically satisfies the demigods, who are parts of that Supreme Personality. So, if we want to benefit the world, the best thing we can do is to become a devotee of Krishna. So if we surrender and we offer our energy to the center, Krishna being the center, of course, then that by giving our energy to that center, then the world is nourished. And it's kind of paradoxical. The example, of course, is given the root of the tree. If you water the root of the tree, then the entire tree is benefited. So if Krishna is an analogy in this analogy, then Krishna is the root. And then, so if we give our energy to him, then the entire tree, all the leaves and twigs and branches are energized as well. So Vaishnavas, they bring the light of God into the world. That's what they do. So they're energizing the world. They're enlightening the world by embodying that God consciousness. And so Madhavendra Puri himself, he benefited the world by establishing the worship of Krishna, engaging all the surrounding villages. So at that time in Vrindavan, sure, there was worship going on. But then when Madhavendra Puri got involved, when he was brought there by Krishna, Krishna even says, I've been watching you for many days, wondering when will Madhavendra Puri come? So when he did finally come, and the deity revealed himself in the dream, and Madhavendra Puri established the deity on top of Govardhan. That worship was extended to hundreds and thousands of people. I mean, I don't know how many people were living in the area at the time. From the description, it was quite a few. So all the surrounding villages, these people suddenly had this opportunity to give their energy to the center, to Krishna, that they didn't have that opportunity in the same way before, especially since it was service that was manifested or extended through such a high caliber devotee as Madhavendra Puri. It's like if I engage someone in Krishna's service, that's one thing. If Madhavendra Puri engages you in service, that's something else entirely, because he's got a direct line to Krishna. And so if your service is going through him, then you know that Krishna is accepting it. So he's benefiting all these people by engaging them in this beautiful, gorgeous service to the Gopal deity, which, as we heard in the last session, is, if you have the adhikar to see, he's non-different from Krishna himself. So pretty amazing, the scale that he was able to engage so many people on, which in his case, which it's difficult to think of it this way because it's subject to error. But you could say that the scale of his engagement externally, of people in service externally, reflected the depth of his internal relationship and love of God. Now, there can be a tendency to think amongst some neophyte people that, well, just see, then if that's the case, then Prabhupada's the greatest devotee because he did this amazing external, he engaged the whole world in Krishna's service and brought Gaudiya Vaishnavism to the entire world. And so therefore he's greater than everybody else, where that's not actually true. I mean, you could have someone who is completely unknown sitting under a tree in Vrindavan, as Prabhupada was before he had this whole mission, before he had his worldwide mission, just sitting there at Radha Damodar, just a sadhu, sitting there and crying every night for Rupa Goswami's mercy. So just because there's no external engagement and service that the devotee engages others in, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not deeply realized. That said, they will, because they are trying to help others, they will try to engage others in service, whether it's through, in our sampradaya or in our parivar, I should say. That often takes the form of printing books. Like Prabhupada, even he's living penniless, he's a beggar, after he took sannyas, living at Radha Damodar as a beggar in India, just doing his bhajan and trying to print Back to Godhead magazine, scraping together the rupees to travel to Delhi, scraping together the rupees, begging for paper, and just to get this magazine in the hands of a few people. So that was his preoccupation. So according to his means at the time, he was doing this, engaged in this beneficial work for others. And so when he was given greater means, when he came to the West, then he employed Yukta Vairagya, and he engaged thousands of people because he had the means. So if a Vaishnav is of very meager, very humble, modest means, then they will offer what they have, a fruit, a flower, a leaf, or water, as Krishna says in the Gita. If that's all you have, then offer it, and I will accept it. That's good. And if you're a king and you only offer me water, then you're that's not really proper, right? If you have the means, then you offer what you can. So one has to be cognizant of one's ability, and we need to do what we can according to what we can. So with that, I wanted to, it's getting close to an hour, and I wanted to leave a few minutes for any questions or comments. And that leaves us a fair bit to go through in the next session, which is pretty much what I wanted to do. So if there are any questions or comments, I welcome them now. Well, doesn't sound like anybody's got anything. So we will stop there for this time. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen to me. Thanks for the fist bump, Madan. You're welcome, Bindumati. Oh, good. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Vaishnav Gana ki jai, Sri Madhavandra Puri ji ki jai. Till next time.
Citta Hari Prabhu ki jai.
Hari Bol.